Soldiers of Reddit who have faced child soldiers in combat, what has been your or your comrades' experiences? Any unique challenges you or others have faced? There was a kid sitting on an overpass in Iraq, dropping Molotov cocktails trying to make it into the gunner's hatch of all the MRAPs in our convoy. 50 calories. Gunner saw him and cut him in half. He was probably 10 years old or so. I've seen ages of 12 to 16 in this thread, but a 10-year-old. I can imagine someone my age 15 thinking they're doing the right thing and fighting cause we're usually in way over our heads, but a 10-year-old. That's just not okay. I feel bad for the gunner that had to have scared him for life. Edit: I don't think it was the kid's fault for fighting, but a kid shouldn't be fighting in a war. Especially if they are prepubescent. My point here is that a 10-year-old shouldn't be fighting in a war. My buddy said that kids would often run up to the convoy trucks in Iraq and some of the guys would give them candy, even though they weren't supposed to. On one such occasion, a kid tossed 2 live grenades into the truck. One of the grenades was quickly tossed away to explode without issue, the other was not as easy to get rid of and ended up amongst the group of kids. The guys giving out candy were put on cleanup duty. No idea what the approximate age of the children was and not many other details. It was pretty rare to get him drunk enough and in a mood to talk about any of it. My platoon sergeant was on his 3rd tour when he joined our unit heading to the sandbox. I'll probably never forget the time he just dropped in casual conversation, in a joking manner, "You can take home a lot of things from your time in service, but I'd rather not have been the first guy in my neighborhood with 3 confirmed kills." And he just kept talking from there like he didn't want to give anyone else a chance to question what he just said. It worked. I never asked. End of our tour. Nothing really happened the whole time. He got comfortable enough with us to tell some stories from his past tours. One of them involved meeting a 13-year-old Iraqi boy awkwardly trying to carry an RPG in the suburbs of Baghdad, and the sergeant just up and running at the kid, screaming at the top of his lungs, firing his weapon as fast as he could in the air, scaring the kid enough for him to drop the RPG and run. I never saw his file to see if he had a bronze or silver star, but I think he earned something that day. Kid was likely just being used as a mule to bring gear and ammo to insurgents, so he wasn't likely a threat himself, but he could have been shot for carrying a weapon by someone too quick on the trigger. Sergeant intervened, but chasing someone through the streets is likely to get you isolated and shot, so he had no idea what happened to the kid. My ex was British Royal Marines, and fought child soldiers. This was 10 years before I met him, but he had horrible nightmares and on a couple of occasions broke down crying, while drunk. He never told me everything in a coherent, start-to-finish way, but from what I've pieced together he killed 1 or more child soldiers, protecting his unit. It catapulted him into self-loathing. He got awarded a medal for it, refused to accept it, but was forced to attend the ceremony with members of the royal family. Only got through it by drinking himself into a stupor and then spent the next 4 to 5 years with a serious coke habit before being able to transition into more moderate alcoholism. So yay. I knew a guy who served and we got drunk one night and I was the idiot who asked, "What's the worst thing you saw while serving over there?" He got quiet and got this far away look in his eyes and then he told me this story. I was in an armored convoy and we were in the middle of a patrol, but it had been a pretty normal day. The school buses that were used were pretty much just minivans, so the only way to identify it was a school bus was usually the sticker they placed on the side. Anyways, the area we were in was known for placing copper on top of their bombs because when a bomb ignites the copper liquefies and basically goes through anything. Even our tanks can't block that shit. So we're on patrol and a bomb goes off about 10 feet to our right and I figured I was a dead man. Right then a school bus drove by and provided cover from the blast, so only one of our soldiers was hurt but not seriously. However, that school bus was blown to hell. Most of the kids died, but the worst part was the driver of the school bus survived, who was a middle-aged woman. But her legs and arms had been blown away from the blast, so we had to drive her to the nearest hospital. I'll never forget her screams, especially because she had to sit under my legs since we had no room. She screamed and screamed. But mostly I won't forget the arms and legs of the children that had been destroyed from that blast. It will haunt me forever. Recovering from the addiction after self-medicating on liquor for 6 months after my deployment. I hope you're doing better than before, and I wish you all of the best going forward. I was with the SADF back in Angola. My platoon and I had few brushes with the MPLA. We mostly met poorly trained militias armed with old Soviet gear. But I remember on one occasion, we were entering a village where we were supposed to get water. The village, if we can even call it that, had around 10 to 15 actual houses, and of those at least half were abandoned. I remember that our spotter yelled out to us, telling us to get prepared. Our lieutenant saw something that visibly shocked him and called out our sergeant. We received the order to issue warning shots south of our position. That's when we all saw it, around 30 to 40 kids with guns bigger than them with a few adults who seemed to be their COs. Our sergeant ordered us to target the officers, and we did, even after all 6 other adults were killed. The kids still continued to shoot with no control of their fire. After maybe 5 minutes the order came, fire at will. I don't remember if the entire platoon opened fire, I remember I did. In the moment, I didn't quite think about who I was shooting, I don't think anyone did. All we saw was an enemy eager to send us home in body bags. We saw enemy uniforms, nothing else. Nobody said anything afterwards. My comrades probably all willingly forgot this or justified it by saying something like us or them. It's very easy to analyze the situation if you weren't there. But when you're in the moment, you forget that the ones on the other side are just like you. So to sum it all up, I opened fire without thinking too hard about it. Don't know if I regret it, I just know I don't like remembering. Didn't actually pull the trigger on the kid but was ready to. Convoy through a village and the kid reaches into a pocket and pulls out what looks like a grenade and tries to throw it. I hesitated. The grenade slipped out of his hand behind him. It was damn rock. I was ready to kill a kid over a fucking rock. If it was a grenade and he managed to throw it, my hesitation could have meant my buddies' lives. I'm glad it was rock. I can't speak for others, and thankfully I never had to pull the trigger, but I always gave them a lot more time in the crosshairs, versus an adult. There were several times they ran up unexpectedly, waved a gun in our direction, or just generally acted like they were going to attack us. It put them in my sights and begged God, please don't make me do this. Thankfully, every time, they'd stop what they were doing. If it were an adult aiming a weapon at us, they'd get zero thought. I remember the ones I didn't pull the trigger on so much more than the ones that I did. I'm sure a lot of soldiers would disagree with me, but I sleep just fine at night. Not me, but a fraternity brother and close friend who passed away told me a story once about his second deployment in the Middle East. He was an Army Ranger, Army Special Ops, and was a breacher/first one in during all breaches because he had balls of steel and insane reflexes. He told me that he killed a kid once who couldn't have been more than 14 years old. He said the action wasn't what haunted him, he said it was how it happened. He was leading the team through an alleyway to a door that led to a suspected illegal weapons cache, and he held his breaching shotgun up to the door and gave count, and as soon as he was about to breach, the door swung open and a kid leaned out through the door with an AK-47 pointed outward. So he blasted the kid in the face with the breacher shotgun, and he said the look of surprise on the kid's face was what bothered him, a mix of surprise and inevitability of his doom. There's no running from a fucking shotgun blast to the face. Not really the same thing, but this question reminded me of something I read in Stars and Stripes while I was deployed. Some army unit was doing daily patrols through some shithole town I can't remember the name of. They did this patrol every day and the locals got to know them pretty well and didn't seem to mind. And the kids in town would run alongside the convoy and beg for candy. A bunch of soldiers started tossing them stuff from their MREs. It was a hearts and minds type thing, I guess. Anyway, one day while on this routine patrol and I'd ripped through the convoy while it was stopped and a bunch of kids were gathered around. I can't remember the exact numbers, but I think like maybe 4 soldiers were either killed or wounded and something like 20 or more kids were killed. I know it was a pretty high number, and the first thing I thought was, goddamn, this village just lost like 20% of the kids that live there. I wasn't on this convoy and I don't know anyone who was, but I had been on the same sort of mission dozens of times and could easily place myself there. I saw kids get killed by insurgents and allies, but I never saw a mass casualty situation involving little kids like this. Considering some of the shit in this thread, I'll try to keep mine a little more lighthearted. Kids used to throw rocks at our maps as we were driving through a village. They'd always aim for the gunner and even hit him a couple of times. Eventually he started carrying a wrist rocket slingshot and a bag of Jolly Ranchers. On one particular occasion some kid came pretty close with a rock, so he loaded up his slingshot and drilled him right between the eyes with a Jolly Rancher. The other children saw it on the ground and dogpiled to try and get the candy. Still one of the funniest things I've heard. I was deployed in Afghanistan from 2009 to 2010 and again in 2012 with the US Army. Due to the nature of my deployments, the first one was much more kinetic, and that's where most of my personal encounters with the enemy happened. A lot of the people we fought were teenagers, probably from 16 to 19 years old. So some of them were children by the US definition. But over there people grow up a lot faster. Everyone I dealt with was trying to kill me, so I don't feel any remorse about shooting back at them or dropping mortar rounds on them. I never had to deal with younger kids being a threat or anything like that, thankfully. And honestly, myself and everyone I knew generally really liked the little kids over there. They were usually sweet and nice, and always asked for candy and gum and stuff like that. And even when those little shits would throw rocks at our trucks, it was hard to blame them. Not much else to do for fun around there. My brother was in Iraq during early/mid 2000s when things were really whack. Said he was on gate duty one night and a kid walked up with an MRE trying to get him and his buddies to come up to the gate. Obviously none of them got up because they had MREs of their own, but long story short, the kid blew up from an ID they had put in the MRE bag the kid was holding. He had a couple other stories, but the shit he saw was enough to make a hardcore atheist find Jesus, so I'd. We don't talk much now, but if you're reading this, I love you, man. Taliban like to use kids to spot for mortars and snipers. They know we don't like shooting kids, so they just blatantly stand there with a radio or cell phone directing fire at you right in the open. Evil, and I mean seriously, Antichrist demon child evil grins on their faces. The Taliban also like to do stuff like bury weapons or IEDs with a kid or two within arm's reach. They knew we were watching, either from concealment or with drones or aircraft. They knew we'd be much less likely to fire if kids and women were present. I never shot one. I'd just walk or run up, take the comm device away, and bitch slap them hard enough to put them on their ass. Frankly, I was lucky my ass never got hit, but after a while in the sandbox you actually start treating incoming fire about as casually as most people treat a surprise rain shower. I once bent one over my knee and literally gave him a spanking with my belt after I realized he was the lookout for a night burying team. They'd suddenly turn back into kids and run away crying for mommy. The worst injury I ever received was from a kid though. I was in an Afghan police compound after a patrol and took my helmet off. Some kid, probably 9 or 10, climbed up the wall. I stood up to yell at him to fuck off, and that's the last thing I remember for 2 days. Fucker dropped a cinder block on my head as I was standing up. If you've never been in combat, it's hard to explain to people how frenetic and chaotic combat can be. You don't get a red pip that highlights where the enemy is. You don't have a radar. You don't get a notification that your shot hit its target. You hear bullets whirrt past you, smack into something near you, ground, wall, trees, vehicles, etc., and you get behind cover. You then start yelling to your squad mates about where you collectively think the incoming fire is coming from. Sometimes it's obvious, but usually it's not. You're even more fucked if you're in an urban, semi-urban setting where there are non-combatant civilians running around, worse still when you simply can't tell the difference between the two. You're trying to not die. You're trying to leave cover, acquire a target, shoot that target, and then get back behind cover before someone sees you and shoots you. This does not leave a whole lot of time for pondering how old your target is, what their motivations are, or how long they've been a soldier. Mix this in with the kids who would run around trying to pick up brass in the middle of a firefight, and it's just a hot, chaotic mess. I didn't want to die, so I shot back. Most people who have been in combat will tell you something similar.